It's a real delight to join you in Australia, all the way from Belfast on the island of Ireland. And of course, it's a very different place here, Belfast. The weather is very different from the weather that you're having. And we're on a small island. You're on a great landmass. But there are also some very common features. We're all human beings. We're all people. And in our relationships with each other as individuals and as communities, we often have problems. Some of them historic problems that go back a long way and create great difficulties for us. Problems that we sometimes find end up with violence, and in other cases, people doing harm more to themselves than to other people. In London, in a previous generation, there used to be signs outside boarding houses that said, "No blacks or Irish." So that question of relationships between people and between people who are different, whether different from colour or from culture, often creates deep difficulties and long-standing and painful traumas. And of course, when people experience trauma themselves, sometimes they take that with them in their relationships and visit it on other people. We know that people who've been physically or sexually abused may end up being very sympathetic to others who've been abused, or on the other hand, they may end up being abusers themselves. And when people went from this part of the world, from England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales to Australia, some of them were leaving very difficult, painful, unpleasant experiences behind. Some of them had been accused of crimes and convicted, major crimes and sometimes remarkably minor misdemeanours. And they were sent out to Australia as a punishment. Others were young children who were taken away from their families, or perhaps their families were not able or willing to look after them, and they were sent out to Australia. So whilst some people from my part of the world went out in a very positive way, others went to Australia in a very negative way. And maybe that helps add to our understanding of the fact that some of them treated First Nation people in Australia particularly badly. Whatever the reasons, there isn't any doubt that the history of Australia is littered with terrible trauma and difficulty, and indeed disease, that was brought from my part of the world to your part of the world. And even in my part of the world, we've had difficulties dealing with our trauma and problem. It came forward with us in terrorism and violence, not just for a few years or decades, but actually for hundreds of years. And I spent much of my life trying to understand why it is and how it could be that some people as individuals or groups treat other people as individuals or groups so badly. Treat them as though they weren't really human beings at all. And sadly, as we look around the world at the moment, we don't always find that the situation's improving. One of the most frightening things for me about the way geopolitics is going is the way in which political leaders sometimes talk about others in their own country and in other countries as though they were less than human. That's an appalling situation. But we can't, you and I, necessarily change the geopolitics. What we can do is address and analyse and understand and try to make differences for the better in our own communities. And the first thing that is important, of course, is to recognise each other as individuals and as communities, as real human beings who have their own thoughts and feelings and culture and background and hopes for the future. And that's not been the situation for First Nation people in Australia. Getting recognition as individuals, as human beings, and then getting recognition as First Nations, as First Australians, is still a problem. But I have been really pleased to understand how some progress is beginning to be made. And I really, really hope that 2017 is going to turn out to be the year when a big step is made in constitutional recognition of the first Australians, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia. That would be a big achievement. It would be an enormous step, but it's only a step along the road, because it needs to move on from recognition to respect. When I have been working here in Northern Ireland for most of my life, trying to understand the conflict and how to change it, it became clear to me that one of the key difficulties was that at least one, if not more than one, community here felt humiliated and disrespected. And there were very good historical reasons for that. And even in some cases, current reasons at the time I started to work in this area. And it's clear from working with individual people and communities that this is really about the most toxic thing that you can experience. Disrespect, humiliation, wiping you out as a person, making you feel that all that is important to you and your people is of no value at all and can be tossed to the side. It's extraordinarily toxic. And if you have the experience of being humiliated and disrespected, in years after, you will still remember how that felt, and it doesn't feel good. And as I've gone around the world to look at other places with other conflicts and other kinds of conflicts, this is always the thing that keeps coming back again and again and again: humiliation and disrespect. It's not the only thing, but it's pretty much the most toxic. So recognition needs to be followed by respect. And respect for people, but also respect for the rights of people as individuals and communities. The whole development of our understanding of civil and human rights is really critical. It's one of the great developments of the last 50 years or more. Not that it has answered all the questions. In fact, sometimes it has brought forward new questions, but it is really very important. And so respect must issue forth in rights. But that's not the end of the road. You know, when we started at home here, we thought that if we could get to the point where there was mutual recognition, we call it parity of esteem, and if we could develop respect rather than disrespect, and if we could make sure that everybody's rights as individuals and communities were protected, then we would have succeeded. We would have dealt with the causes of the violence. Well, those things are all important. But they're all important in leading to the fundamental, which is creating new relationships. All our problems are fundamentally about problems of relationships between people and between peoples. In my part of the world, the politics kind of got reduced down to who was controlling the territory. It was all about land. It was about the border. Those people who wanted there to be no border, people from the Catholic nationalist community wanted a united Ireland, separate from Britain. And people who were Protestant unionists who wanted the relationship with Britain to be maintained. And if that could only be maintained with a border, then a border there had to be. So everybody got to concentrating on border and no border, United Kingdom or United Ireland. And they tended to forget that the fundamental problem wasn't the division of the island of Ireland, but the division of the people on the island of Ireland. We couldn't agree how to share this piece of territory, this piece of earth. And so the solution was not going to be found in dealing with a border on a map, or even a constitutional border between North and South, but finding a way in which the people of Ireland, North and South, could share this island in an agreed way. It might be shared on the basis of a border with good neighbourly relations. Or it might be shared in the future with no border at all, particularly in the wider context of the European Union, as we had thought at that time. But whatever, it's about relationships between people and peoples, not just between individual people. You can have good relations between individual Protestants and individual Catholics, individual unionists and individual nationalists. But if there's not good relationship between the whole community of Protestant unionists and Catholic nationalists, then you still have a problem, even if you've got individually good relationships. This is a really challenging thing, and it takes us into understanding culture, history, the pain, the trauma, the distrust, the difficulty, the abuse, the massive dehumanization and unpleasantness that has taken place in the past and that carries on not just in our memories of the past, but on the way we experience the present and fear sometimes for the future. But the aim in the end is to create those new relationships. What's really exciting for me about this CASSE workshop is that it's not just focusing on the past, though it's not forgetting about it at all. It's not just focusing on this very important program of consultation and hopefully a referendum that will be successful in creating constitutional recognition, but it's also looking forward into treating people with respect, ensuring that everybody's rights are understood and accommodated, and that in the end we create a new set of relationships. And that will mean ultimately all of us having to move and develop. People in the majority community, I think, have now begun to realise that many of the ways that that community is structured isn't good for them. There are issues about the politics, about the economy not really serving the needs of many ordinary people. The question of how we deal with the precious earth, the environment. People are understanding that we've not been doing good things there. And even in terms of really fundamental questions about meaning and purpose, religion, faith, sacred values, the transcendent, these are all things that people are beginning to ask questions about and to say, you know, the way that we as white people, as people from the Western world, the way we've followed these things through has not actually been as good as we thought. And we need to find ways of learning and moving forward. For Aboriginal, First Nation people, there are also necessary changes. The world has changed. For 50 or 60,000 years, Australians lived in a particular way. It was a very tough life. But it was a life through which they gained understanding about the meaning of the world, about the relationship with the world, and about the relationship with each other. But that world has changed. And so it's really important to hold on to the history, appreciate the culture, ensure that the deep insights and understandings of the past are not lost, but are developed and enrich our life today and tomorrow, but also that it is a new world, and that first Australians need also the chance to develop in their relationship with Australia as it is now, both physically and in relationships with other people. So all of us have lessons to learn from the past, very painful lessons, but we also have the possibility of moving forward and moving forward together into the future, not in antagonism to each other, but in learning from each other and with each other. And as you do that, you will not only have something to give to each other and to your children and grandchildren, but something to give to the rest of the world, which desperately needs to understand and learn these lessons. That's one of the things that is exciting for me here in Ireland. We have done lots of practical and political and legal and constitutional things. We have ticked lots of the kinds of boxes that you might expect in a peace process. But we still have to make changes of attitude and culture so that we can live together for the present and for a future together. And we're learning that, and it's not easy. And we have setbacks usually created by ourselves in these relationships. But we're also able to move forward in a way that's positive. I think that's also possible for people in Australia. And I very much hope that not only will I get the chance to learn back from Pamela and colleagues in CASSE about this conference and about the work that you're doing together. But I hope that it will be possible not just to join you in spirit, but in person before too long, and that together we can find ways of learning and working and developing to create a better world informed by all the cultural experiences and wisdom of the past, as well as the new relationships we develop for the future. I wish you well, and I look forward to being with you again before too long.